Well, I'm excited to introduce our next speaker. We're going to give a quick civics quiz or trivia quiz. Which congressional district is the second largest by geography of the 435 in America? I'm setting you up. The answer, of course, that is Montana. Alaska is the largest congressional district by geography. Montana is second out of the 435. If I were to ask you which congressional district out of 435 represents more people than any district, number one out of 435, the answer to that is it's Montana. So most people don't think about Montana as having the most in its congressional district, but we do. And like many of you who grew up in Montana, we used to have 2 congressional representatives. Today we have 1, and Ryan Zinke represents over 1,030,000 people. Another trivia question. Who was the first woman ever elected to Congress, and where did she come from? Jeanette Rankin, of course, and proudly from the state of Montana. And who was the first Navy SEAL ever elected to Congress, and what state sent him there? And the answer is Montana and Ryan Zinke. So we are a state that's been known to set records and be historic in terms of who we send back to Washington, and Ryan Zinke serves the people as their sole representative in the United States House. He's a 5th-generation Montanan. He was a former state senator and a 23-year U.S. Navy SEAL veteran. In 2014, Ryan was elected to the United States House. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee and the House Committee on Natural Resources. Ryan and I actually were both Boys State delegates together in 1979, back when Boys State used to be at Western Montana College there in Dillon. And he came representing Whitefish, and I came representing Bozeman. He's been a great partner to have on Capitol Hill. He's been a great partner on this fight to have more Montana-made solutions and less coming out of D.C., focusing on innovation versus regulation. Please welcome your United States Representative, Ryan Zinke.
Thanks. I think it's a tribute to Steve. You know, one is that the attendance here, not only in the number of people that came to listen, but also the keynote speakers and the quality of the message. And I guess the takeaways on it is, one is that Steve is enormously well respected in the Hill, and the other takeaway is Montana is important to our natural resources. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the Middle East and security and what we face and why it's important on the energy side. My prior background is a SEAL, but I also was in charge of special forces in Iraq, and I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East. And this is the way I see what's happening, is that the current policy of, and I would say retreat, and I'll be critical, has formed vacuums. And these vacuums are being filled. And if you go around the globe in the South China Sea, you see China building islands in disputed territory, primarily in the Spratlys. And the United States is giving them 12 nautical miles leeway with their Navy. We're not flying over them, and nor are we challenging South China Sea. And when that happens, of course, why is South China Sea important? It's important because it's a gateway for shipping lanes into South Korea, into Japan. But also our allies in the region look at this, and there's uncertainty whether we are going to be a reliable ally or not. And it has ramifications in the Far East. And then you do a pivot to the Ukraine, and you are watching that the United States is not honoring our treaty obligations, and thus you have a very aggressive Russia. And Russia is not only moving to shore to solidify their area in the Crimean Peninsula and the Ukraine, but they're also planting flags in the North Pole, and Russia's aggressiveness behavior has ramifications because our allies are looking at us, whether we're, especially our allies in the Eastern Europe, are looking at us for leadership and wondering whether the United States will honor our commitment should it happen to them. And lastly, in the Middle East. The Middle East, what you have now is an expanding Persia, otherwise known as Iran, which in my estimation is the #1 terrorist threat that we face. As bad as ISIS is, as bad as Al-Qaeda is, Iran's certain behavior, especially since the treaty was signed, of launching a series of ICBM missiles. The last one, written in Hebrew, was destruction of Israel, I think should be a concern to us all. So why is the Middle East important, and what can we do about it? And why is Russia there? Well, Russia is the main supplier of gas in Eastern Europe, and I believe Russia's play in the Middle East is to shore up Assad, and Assad in Syria is tied politically to Iran, and Russia is moving to expand and develop Iran's gas fields primarily to ship gas to control and broker natural gas into Southern Europe. So they would have a wedge. The Southern Europe now being at least brokered, as Russia would see it, and Eastern Europe being brokered by the interests of today. What's pitted against them is the United States military still is the strongest military that's ever been conceived in the history of mankind. And we hear about the challenges that are faced in the military, and there are challenges, and they are real. And I would say our military state today is damaged, bruised, battered, but not broke. Our military, the 32 combat brigades that make up our central power on the ground, of the 32 combat brigades, only 3 are fully combat ready. And yet, which striking figure. The budget for the military still remains about $610 billion, by far dwarfs any other department of the discretionary spending. But pivoting back to our capability, in particular our Navy still has the capacity to do what no other Navy, with no other combinations in Navy, even if you take the combined strength of China, Russia, and European Union, our Navy can do more in the Persian Gulf around the world on a day-to-day routine basis than those other navies combined. And I don't see that changing in the next 10 years. Well, how energy is moving is all of a sudden our energy picture in America is far different than it was just a few years ago. I'm a former geologist, and when I went to school, I was taught, like most geologists of that time, that we were going to be absolutely out of petroleum in particular in about 2005. That is not only not true, it is not even conceivable that we would be out, considering we have now fracking and horizontal drilling. How has that changed? As you look at a very aggressive Russia, and how do we check Russia? Well, there's military intervention. I don't think we want to go toe-to-toe with Russia in the eastern part of Europe, but we certainly can put a lot of pressure on Russia by transporting and subplanting their liquid natural gas sales in Eastern Europe. Because as it turns out, we have not only more liquid natural gas, but we can deliver it at a price point that's considerably cheaper than what Russia currently can produce. And then you do a pivot to Iran. Iran's economy is almost solely based on energy and will continue to be solely based on energy. Is that with our Navy combined strength, with an administration with resolve, we can subplant every drop of energy that Iran can produce and subplant it with energy that was made in the United States, or at least North America. And we have the Navy to do it. I would say Kennedy called it a quarantine. I would characterize it more of a blockade, but certainly that was in our capability. So as bad as the Iranian deal was and continues to be, there are options within the portfolio of American power to respond. I was asked before I came up to talk a little about Syria, about what is the military solution and how does it relate to energy. Well, on energy, it's been the policy of the United States since Jimmy Carter be energy independent, which we can easily achieve, and we can go further and be the dominant exporter. And how does that affect the Middle East, again, in Syria? Syria is going to take American intervention. There is no question in my mind that air operations alone will continue to lag behind and be ineffective. but it cannot be just an American-led military operation. Syria has to be an operation within our allies too, because what we face in the Middle East today is not only a war between East and West, we face a war within Islam itself. The Sunni lineup is Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and countries of Saudi and Jordan. Most of the world in Muslim, Islamic world is Sunni, about 90%. In the Middle East, you have the other side of it, which is Shia. And Shia is represented by Assad and Iran. Both of the radical elements within Sunni and Shia have the same goal, the same professed goal, either by Twitter or manifestation, is to destroy Israel, to annihilate the Jewish population off the face of the earth, and destroy the great Satan. That is the stated goal of each of the Islamic terrorist organizations that's manifested by either ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or the #1 country and the sponsor of more terrorist incidences and more money going to terrorist organizations than any other on the face of this planet, and that is Iran. Syria itself represents, I think we made 3 mistakes in Iraq, which has led us to where we are. The first mistake in Iraq was we dismantled the Iraqi army. You had a force there that, even though it was not as capable as certainly the United States, when we dismantled the army and removed all Ba'athist connection to its former dictator, what they did is it put in the unemployment lines the very people that had the capability and capacity and training about weapons, explosives. So a lot of what we felt in 2004 and beyond about the insurgencies was directed from the very people that we put in the unemployment lines. The second mistake we made is we put too much faith in a Shia-led centralized government out of Baghdad, and in Iraq, Shia are the most populous. And when that centralized government disenfranchised the Sunni population in the Anbar province and disenfranchised the Kurds up north, it became, if you're a Sunni in the Anbar province, they didn't look to the central government as being a legitimate power. They looked for it as an antagonist. So we made a mistake in putting too much faith too early in a central government. And the last mistake we made was to leave without having a plan and just hoping that the vacuum that we would create would somehow be filled by something that would resemble a democracy or at least a representative government. That vacuum when we left was filled by ISIS. When ISIS, its predecessor, to a degree with Al-Qaeda, but is nonetheless a radical Islamic from the Sunni side. So to fix this thing, and it will require U.S.-led military. No one else on the face of the planet has the same capability, near even close, as what we do. But again, because it's a war within Islam, as much as it's a war between the East and West, we're going to have to lead it militarily with our allies. More Muslims have been killed by far from ISIS or Al-Qaeda than Christians, even though we hear of the crucifixions, the beheadings of Christians. The numbers, far more Muslims have been killed and will remain on that statistic for some time. The key to the Middle East, though, is American intervention militarily with our allies. And when we move ISIS out, and we can remove ISIS from territory, that's not a military issue. It has to be then, as you push ISIS out from Sunni territory, then you're going to have to make sure that at the end of the day that you supplant it with a Sunni body and not Shia. The worst possible outcome would be to push Sunni out and spend American blood doing it, so push ISIS out, and then have it folded in the back, and having that territory then be controlled by a Shia-controlled government. And in Iraq, currently the Shia militia is controlled by Iran. So the worst outcome is push ISIS out and then have it fold and emboldened a much larger, influential Iran. I can say this. It is absolutely fixable, but it will take American leadership. A driving policy of this country, and I'll go back to John F. Kennedy. In his inaugural address, he said, we as a country would pay any price and bear any burden in the defense of liberty. He didn't say liberty in America. He didn't say liberty in the Western Hemisphere. He said in the pursuit and defense of liberty. And that was a rallying call for our allies across the world that were being abused by a tyrant to stand. It was also a clear and compelling indication that we as a country would be a reliable ally. And if we should put a red sand line or a red line or a red dotted line and we said we will go no further than this, we stood by it. But when we give red lines and we don't stand, then our allies no longer trust us, and our enemies no longer fear us. It'll take American leadership to repair the damage, and it is absolutely repairable. The world is looking for America to lead, and a great power, a great nation like America, we cannot walk away from a great responsibility we also share, and you cannot separate power and responsibility. They are the same. In Montana, we have an opportunity to contribute. We have an opportunity to contribute with our coal and our oil, our natural gas. The gentlemen and ladies in this room have an opportunity to contribute. We are at the beginning, what I believe, is a turn on our energy policy, because I believe our policy as of late has been wrong. It is much, whether you sit on the belief of global warming, the disbelief, it is much better to produce American and North American energy under reasonable regulation than produce it outside in third world countries with no regulation. That is a clear and compelling fact. So thank you for being here, and I'll take questions if you have them, just a short number of questions. Anybody? The lights are hitting me right in the eye. The South China Sea protection is one. I don't view China as our enemy. And the question was, how do we protect our sea lanes in the South China Sea? I don't view China as our enemy. I view it as China as a very aggressive competitor. China cannot compete with the United States if we're allowed, number one, to compete. If you look at the regulatory burden that we're facing and we're feeling as America, when you add it up in 1 year, 2012, it was about $3 trillion of regulatory burden on business. There is no other country in the world that can sustain $3 trillion worth of hit year after year other than the United States. That's how strong and powerful we are as a country. South China Sea, the Chinese also know that, and we have a navy. And we have to work with China, with Chinese. And our economies are tied more than people realize, as energy is tied, more than people realize. So I do think we have to show strength and resolve. I think now their islands are made, we're going to have to deal with it, because I don't think they're going to remove their islands anytime soon, and they're not going to demilitarize them. So, any questions? Well, I want to thank you for one, being here. I want to thank you for believing in American energy. And thank you, Steve, for all you've done for Montana and will continue to do. God bless, and God bless the great state of Montana. Thanks.